Why have Alibaba spent hundreds of millions of dollars buying a traditional news company? And what does this mean for the news industry as a whole? In the company of Yun-Hee Kim of the Wall Street Journal, please welcome to the stage South China Morning Post CEO Gary Liu and Alibaba co-founder Joe Tsai.
Thank you. All right.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So the topic of our discussion today is transforming the news industry in 2017. As many of you know, the newspaper industry is struggling with declining print ad revenues. A lot of newspapers are cutting staff. But if there's one company that's investing in this era, is the South China Morning Post. And Alibaba has made a huge bet in the newspaper industry by investing in the company about a year and a half ago. So let me start with you, Joe. I think when Alibaba announced its investment in South China Morning Post, many people were shocked in light of the kind of gloomy outlook. Do you have any regrets about investing in this bleak media industry?
Absolutely not. We're very happy. We bought into the South China Morning Post with a vision to do two things. Number one, we want to tell the biggest story of our lifetime, which is China. And I'll go into that a little bit. And number two, we want to take a 114-year-old newspaper and put it into the digital age. And maybe Gary can elaborate on that. So I'll talk about the China story aspect. I think it's pretty much indisputable that the rise of China as an economic power today is going to shape the global conversation about not just economics, but politics, culture, and so many different areas. I think this is a story that's really worth paying attention to. It's also one of the great superpowers of the world, so that it's important for the Western markets to understand China so that this could facilitate better relationships between, for example, China and the United States, China and the European countries. When I started at Alibaba, China was an economy with a GDP per capita of $820 per person. Today is 8,000. So just within a very short period of time, when I was at Alibaba, well, not too short, but 18 years, the GDP per capita has gone up 10 times. Today, there are over 120 million Chinese tourists that go around the world every year, and then they come back to their own country. They're influencing the culture, the dialogue, and how people perceive Chinese people around the world. Yet China is a conundrum. It has 200 million middle-class consumers, but 600 million people are living in the rural areas. It's a dichotomy. There are conflicting stories. There's good parts and bad parts. So who's going to tell that story? We felt that the SEMP was the perfect vehicle for us to explain China because it is a paper that's located in Hong Kong, that is close to China, that has an Asian perspective, and also Hong Kong affords the freedom of the press for us to tell that story. We think it's perfect. And the part about taking the SEMP, it's a 114-year-old newspaper. How do we make sure that it's relevant in today's world, in today's digital world? I think that's more of a question for Gary. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure, absolutely. I think that the digital world disintermediating the news industry as we know it is not new. It's been happening for the last 20 years, and certainly the news industry deserves a little bit more credit than it gets, and that over the course of the last at least 5 to 8 years, the news organizations, the great news organizations in the world have been reacting. But what the internet has done is effectively it's created a consumer expectation of speed and ubiquity that didn't exist in the past. And that consumer behavior change and change in consumer expectation has made it so that we have to react completely differently. So at the SCMP, that really means four different areas of investment. The first one is that we have to invest in a very different culture, because sometimes it's difficult to reconcile the way to collect and create quality, truthful, objective news with the speed that is expected of us, okay? Not to mention the distribution channels that come after the fact. And so the culture of a news organization has to be able to reconcile those two things. So we have to change the culture. The second is we have to invest in people. There are new skill sets that are required to be able to capture and report on news in this day and age. And we need to not only train up the existing base of employees at the South China Morning Post, but add new skill sets to it. The third is that we have to invest in consumer product, because the editorial product as we know it today of news, right, or as it's been for decades, if not over a century, has to be different with the different distribution channels we have today, because most people are not opening up a paper newspaper anymore. It is not only on mobile on a 5-inch screen, it's on mobile through dozens of different distribution and discovery channels. And then finally, we actually do have to invest significantly in internal tools to help our employee base, to help our reporters be able to report in the right way, with the right speed, but also at the right accuracy. So 4 major areas of investment for us as a company to transform.
And Gary, you spent a lot of time in the tech industry. You worked at Spotify first and then joined Diggs. You were CEO of a news aggregator in New York. Given that you have spent so much time in the tech industry, what do you think is going to be the single biggest disruptor in the media industry in the next 3 to 5 years?
I'm not sure there's going to be a single one that is the disruptor that we have to worry about over the course of the next 5 years. I do think that consumer behavior is going to continue to change, that we haven't figured it out, and it certainly hasn't stabilized. And so news organizations as a whole have to be able to react faster. We have to understand what is coming next, and by that I mean look at tweens, right, teenagers, and what they're using, and using that as a predictor for what expected user experience is going to look like. I do think that if there is a technology trend that is going to affect significantly our industry, and is one that we haven't talked enough about, is it's going to be artificial intelligence. Because I think artificial intelligence is really going to change 2 things. It's going to change the way that consumers expect to find news. Okay, so we're talking about natural language processing. With the rise of intelligent home speakers, people are going to start asking devices questions, and they expect to get answers back as the news back as answers. And news organizations need to be able to react to that is becoming increasingly the discovery method. But secondarily to that is that natural language generation will also allow news organizations, there's already a lot of this in the in business reporting, and Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Washington Post, where natural language generation has allowed certain types of commodity news to be written by machine in a very, very accurate way. It frees up journalists to be able to do the type of hard-hitting journalism that we do believe actually is accountable journalism for the fourth estate. So those are 2 trends that newspapers have to pay more attention to.
You mentioned artificial intelligence, Joy. Alibaba is also investing in AI. You just launched a speaker to compete with Amazon's Echo. In terms of your business portfolio, why is that area of importance to your growth strategy?
Well, AI is not something that we woke up one day and decided, oh, gee, this is an area we need to invest in. AI has always permeated throughout various parts of our operations. For example, when you open up a Taobao app, what I see is very different from what you see. That's because we're using AI and the data insight that we have about consumers to predict what you're likely to purchase as your next purchase. And another example is customer service. We're serving more than 90% of our customer inquiries through machine intelligence, through chatbots. So it's always been very core to our business operations. And I think one very, very important thing about AI and how we think about it is you need to have a lot of touches to consumers so that you have the consumer insight, because data is absolutely important to develop a good AI-powered any kind of service. And the other thing is, if you look at the Alibaba ecosystem, we're doing online shopping, we're delivering packages to people, we're doing payment, entertainment. All the things that we do creates so many different use cases to apply AI technology. So that's something that we feel very excited about.
How can AI be introduced into the newsroom of the future?
I think it's sequential. There are a couple of major steps there. The first is that we have to learn how to collect data better. And this itself is a very, very important discipline. From then on, then we extract intelligence and insights, and you can start by operating the business in a more effective, efficient, reactionary way. And then you can improve your product because of those insights and intelligence. And then finally, I think with enough density of data collected, and with enough insight and understanding of what that data actually tells you about user behavior, then you will be able to use artificial intelligence to actually meet a consumer need, a developing consumer need. In the newsrooms that we have at the South China Morning Post today, we are early on in that process. And so our newsroom is starting to be able to react to real-time data in a way that we couldn't 3 to 5 years ago. And that itself is already it's changing what kind of news we report, when we report it, and how we publish it. Those next steps, natural language generation, natural language processing, it's going to take time, but it requires us to actually invest in that kind of discipline expertise today.
Let's talk a little bit about SCMP's expansion plans, because I know that you guys are a rare company that have been stepping up investments, expanding your staff. So in 3 to 5 years, where do you expect to be in terms of your growth? Why don't we start with Joe?
Sure. I think the first principle of coming into the SCMP is we look at this thing not as a Hong Kong newspaper. Yes, we're located in Hong Kong, that affords all sorts of advantages, for example, proximity to China, the press freedom, etc. But our vision is that the audience, the readership base, has to be global because it's an English language. So in the future, we want to have a broader global reach, more users and readers from all over the world. Anywhere where they speak English, the SCMP should have readership base. And I think that's the broader vision that we're moving towards. Gary?
Do you envision having a newsroom somewhere in the US at some point, or Southeast Asia, where Alibaba is investing heavily?
We have journalists outside of Hong Kong and China. In the United States, very specifically, we have journalists. And we do expect to continue to build up our presence, a reporting presence in the United States, as an example. Just because Sino-US relationship is arguably the most important bilateral relationship in the world, maybe not even arguably, just because these are the 2 largest economies in the world, and we expect them to be the 2 largest economies in the world for a period of time. And so our expansion plan really is following the increasing appetite that the world has for really understanding China better. We are coming up, well, actually the window to be able to ignore China is rapidly, rapidly closing. Of course, those who are diplomats and academics and folks in business, especially multinational corporations, have not been able to ignore China for at least a couple of decades now. But for the mass majority of folks, at this point, we have to start understanding China better. And so we're going to follow that appetite, and we believe that we both see this as not only an opportunity, also as an accountability. Is that if people have a desire to want to understand this enormous country of 1.3 billion people better, then we will hopefully be able to serve that need.
Many years ago, a lot of newspapers started to remove or actually charge their subscribers for content, for premium content. SCMP decided to go the other way, to remove the paywall. Joe, can you talk to us a little bit about the decision behind removing the paywall and whether that decision has worked in terms of boosting your readership?
It's an interesting question. So it's the first decision we made. Even before we closed on the acquisition of the newspaper, I penned a letter to our readers, and in that, the one thing that we promised our readers was that the paywall will come down. And that's because today, if you look at the SCMP, if you try to put up all sorts of barriers for the readers to access the content, you're never going to grow the newspaper. You're never going to grow the news business itself. And journalists get very frustrated that what they write, what they spend a lot of time working on, don't get the reach, all right? So it was very obvious for us to start taking the business and the paper on a path of growth. We have to open up the readership and make everybody to have access to the content. Now, subscription model itself, I mean, Gary can elaborate on that, but our view is that there's a place for the subscription model. And when you look at the content, maybe you have a multi-product approach. The product is not just the paper as we know it that's printed in the four corners of the piece of paper, but there could be different kinds of things, different kinds of formats that you could distribute to readers in a way that it's so valuable to readers that people are willing to pay for.
So you can grow your subscriber base, but ultimately I think media companies have to balance profit. And at what point do you decide that you're going to have to worry about profitability?
At Alibaba, we have a general philosophy on gestation period.
What is that gestation period?
The gestation period is it's an over 10 years horizon. If you look at every business that we've created, whether it's Taobao or Alipay or our logistics business or Alibaba Cloud Computing, it pretty much follows that pattern. And what is that pattern? Basically, within the first 3 years, you're trying to create a product that consumers like, that people like to access. So it's product development. From year 3 to year 5, you try to develop a revenue model. You don't think about revenue model within the first 3 years because that's too early. You want to have a product that people like first. So the revenue model comes in at around between year 3 to year 5. And then from year 5 to year 7, you think about path to profitability. Beyond year 7, you try to harvest. But after year 10, you have to go back and reinvent yourself. That's the cycle of our business. Every unit that we've created are on that cycle. And we know very well which business unit is on which cycle and what we need to do to help it grow within that cycle. I think we've just only into the SEMP for about a year.
A year and a half.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking that question, because I think I just earned myself more time than I thought I had. The way that we think about it at the paper is we care a lot about revenue and profitability in the future, because that is a sustainable business that holds the South China Morning Post accountable in 2 ways. Number one, it makes sure that we affirm the quality of our product. Okay? Our journalists need to be, as they're writing, as they're creating, be thinking about, is this good enough for somebody to pay for? Maybe we don't have to ask for the money today, but our product needs to be quality. And so revenue and eventually the need for revenue, the ability to be able to ask somebody to pay for our product is really, really important to make sure that we're held accountable for quality. But second, and probably even more importantly, is that profitability for a news organization means that the only people we are beholden to are the readers. And that is extremely important for sustaining editorial independence. Every single newspaper who commits to editorial independence and integrity, at the end of the day, needs to be a profitable organization, or else you're going to be asking for money from somebody besides the readers. Individually, I hate asking for money, but as a news organization, it can become dangerous when you continually have to ask for money for somebody that's not your reader base. And so for us, we are in a privileged situation right now that we get to invest in not only people, but invest in technologies and experiment with new formats, new products, new channels, without having to worry every single day about bottom line profitability. That is a privileged situation that allows us to move faster, allows us to experiment more than our competitors. But if we lose sight of what it means to be a revenue-generating, profitable business down the road, we will atrophy in ways that are very dangerous for a news organization. And so I'm very thankful that we are in this position of luxury. And we are going to actually grow towards profitability as opposed to everyone else in the industry who's cutting to get to profitability or get back to profitability. But I do remind, and our executives remind our team that, that we have to hold ourselves accountable even in this stage of investment.
Print advertising still represents the bulk of your revenue. How are you diversifying your revenue base to continue to grow 3 to 5 years down the road?
Hong Kong is a very interesting marketplace. We are in education mode in this city, in this region right now, about shifting revenue from print to digital. And the global marketplace, that shift is already very much, I wouldn't say it's complete, but the shift has moved further than what we know of here in Hong Kong. We're talking about a $500 billion global advertising marketplace. 38% of it lives in linear TV still today. 38% of it lives in digital advertising. And so for the first time in 2016, those two advertising channels are now crossing, and digital will be larger than linear TV for the very first time in this coming year. Hong Kong is still in the process of that transition, and so as an organization that is primarily based here, where our revenue is primarily from the city, we are participating in that education. That itself is diversification. But what we are also doing from a consumer standpoint is we are building new product that will allow us down the road to have new channels of revenue generation. We do think that long-term sustainability for the business is going to not be 1 or 2 different types of monetization, but it's going to be a whole array of ways where we're saying we're going to give you the right news and information and media product, and we're going to ask for you to pay for different channels.
Joe, I want to shift gears to talk a little bit about the future. Alibaba has been a very acquisitive company. You just poured another $1 billion into Southeast Asian e-commerce from Lazada. And Financial, your affiliates going after MoneyGram in the US. When you look at deals, what do you look for? And if there were areas that you'd want to invest in the future, which areas would they be?
In the green room in the back, we talked a little bit about this. I wanted to set the context for that question because we just saw Amazon spend $17 billion in cash to buy an organic supermarket. And a few years ago, we saw Facebook spend $19 billion to buy WhatsApp, which generates 0 revenues. So I think if you look at companies that serve large scale, in a very large scale, hundreds of millions, even billions of consumers, we have to think very, very far about the future. And in the case of Alibaba, we haven't come across a $17 or $19 billion acquisition yet, but we do spend quite a bit of the company's capital to expand into new areas. So geographic expansion is very important for us, and our approach when it comes to geographic expansion is to partner with entrepreneurs locally, as opposed to hiring some headhunting firm to hire a general manager to put into the local market or sending someone from headquarters. We think that any business, new sort of geographic areas we expand into, we want to partner with A, people who have the local knowledge, and B, people who have the passion and the entrepreneurial spirit to run as fast as they can. And that explains why we are putting dollars into, for example, Southeast Asia, in India, where we've partnered with entrepreneurs in our M&A activities.
Let's talk a little bit about the Indian market since you brought it up. It's a very competitive market. A lot of the foreign players are actually very competitive, like Amazon's doing very well in India. How do you, as a local player from China, how do you tackle that market? Because there are similarities with China, but also a lot of differences.
Sure.
Are there any companies that look appealing as an investment in India for Alibaba?
We are already invested in a online payments company called Paytm. And we're very happy with the progress of Paytm because they have tens of millions of users actively daily to use the payment app. And we see the potential of using payments as a foundation to grow into e-commerce businesses. And so that is a perfect example of where we partner with an entrepreneur who is passionate. People may, I don't know if Vijay is here, but people may identify him as the Jack Ma of India. And those are the people like him are people that we like to work with because they understand locally, they have the passion. So that's pretty much I want to say about India.
Okay. Gary, when SEMP does go abroad, is your strategy to look more at partnerships or more in potentially investing in media companies?
I'd have to ask Joe for money to invest in media companies. I do think that we have an opportunity to partner and also to launch ourselves into new marketplaces. The South China Morning Post, as a 114-year newspaper, there is a legacy of excellence there. It has always been a regional newspaper that has had global impact. And we are today going to invest to increase that global impact, especially in our coverage around China. And so we do think that our growth into new markets, whether it's the United States or different countries in Southeast Asia, that we have an authority to actually go in and say, we understand the Chinese marketplace, we understand what China is about, we understand, we can explain and offer you deep analysis about why China is doing what it's doing. And we're going to do it underneath this brand that has been around and has built the credibility, its credibility over 114 years. At the same time, there are partners in these local marketplaces that understand the local market consumer behavior, that understand how to articulate a news story for that local marketplace. We'd be remiss if we didn't spend time with them to learn about their user base and to potentially work with them as well.
Both of you earlier on touched on the importance of the China market. A lot of media companies are investing in covering China. What is, in your opinion, is the biggest challenge trying to cover that market and potentially operating in China? Because I know SCMP is blocked in China currently, as other media companies are.
You know what the biggest challenge is? The biggest challenge for most media companies is that their editors are sitting in New York and London that don't understand China. So reporters always get frustrated that their stories are being mangled into a perspective that is a single lens perspective. We don't have that problem at the SCMP.
Okay. Well, thank you very much both for a very insightful discussion.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.